The restaurant went quiet. Forks froze midair. Conversation stopped. Even the background music felt too loud. All because one man said 4 words that would end his career forever. "We don't serve your kind." The woman stood still. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She simply looked at him, calm, composed, and unshaken, as dozens of people stared in disbelief. Her name was Alicia Grant, and in that moment, no one in the upscale downtown restaurant had any idea who she really was or what was about to happen next. Alicia slowly exhaled, as if steadying herself. Years of experience had taught her something most people never learn. Anger gives power away. Silence, when used correctly, takes it back. "Can you repeat that?" she asked softly. The manager, Brian Collins, shifted uncomfortably. He glanced around, noticing the attention now focused entirely on him. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "This restaurant has standards," he said, louder this time, "and I don't think you fit them." A low murmur rippled through the room. A couple at the corner table shook their heads. A waitress behind the counter looked horrified. Someone near the bar quietly pulled out their phone. Alicia nodded slowly. "Just to be clear," she said, her voice steady, "you're denying me service despite open tables, based on how I look?" Brian scoffed. "I'm a manager. I decide who eats here." That was the moment everything changed. Alicia reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Not angrily, not dramatically, but deliberately. She pressed record. "Please state your name and position," she said. Brian laughed nervously. "You're being ridiculous." "Please," Alicia repeated. "Brian Collins, general manager," he snapped. "Thank you," she said calmly. "That's all I needed." She stepped aside and sat quietly near the entrance. No yelling, no scene, just silence, the kind that makes people uneasy. Brian tried to brush it off, returning to the counter as if nothing had happened. But the atmosphere was broken. Guests whispered. Servers avoided eye contact. Everyone could feel it. Something irreversible had just been set in motion. What Brian didn't know was that Alicia Grant wasn't just another customer. She was a senior compliance officer for a hospitality investment firm that oversaw dozens of high-end restaurants across the country, including this one. Her job was to ensure businesses followed federal law, company policy, and ethical standards. And moments ago, Brian had violated all 3 on camera. Alicia sent the video to corporate headquarters with a short message. Discrimination. Confirmed. On site. Then she made one phone call. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm at the location now." Less than 20 minutes later, the front doors opened again. 2 sharply dressed individuals walked in, not customers. Their badges were visible. Their expressions serious. They asked for Brian. The color drained from his face. Right there in front of staff and guests, the video was replayed. His words echoed through the restaurant, louder than before. There was no misunderstanding. No context to hide behind. Brian tried to explain. He blamed stress. He blamed policy. He blamed anything but himself. It didn't matter. He was terminated on the spot. Keys handed over. Badge removed. Escorted out through the same door where Alicia had been humiliated minutes earlier. The restaurant was placed under immediate review. As Alicia stood to leave, one of the executives offered her an apology, compensation, anything she wanted. She declined. "I didn't come here for revenge," she said. "I came here for dinner." She paused, then added quietly, "But accountability matters." By the next morning, the incident was everywhere. Social media, news headlines, corporate statements. Brian's career was over, not because Alicia was powerful, but because his actions were wrong. Alicia never raised her voice. She let truth do the work. And the lesson was clear. Never assume you know who someone is. Never confuse silence with weakness. And never forget, consequences don't need anger to arrive. Sometimes they arrive calmly and end everything. Then she stepped aside and pulled out her phone. Brian barely noticed. He was already waving another guest forward, acting as if Alicia no longer existed. To him, the situation was over. Another problem avoided. Another person dismissed. But Alicia wasn't recording for attention. She was documenting evidence. She opened her camera, ensured the audio was clear, and calmly turned back toward the host stand. "Just for clarity," she said, her voice steady. "Could you please repeat why I'm being denied service?" Brian groaned, rolling his eyes. "Because this is a private establishment, and I decide who gets seated. So, it has nothing to do with availability?" Alicia asked. "No," he snapped. "It has to do with fit." That single word landed heavily in the room. A man at the bar shook his head. A woman near the window whispered, "Did he really say that?" The waitress who had frozen earlier now looked visibly shaken, gripping her tray too tightly. Alicia nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said again. She turned off the camera and took a seat near the entrance, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. To everyone watching, it looked like she had accepted defeat. But inside, Alicia was already moving 10 steps ahead. What Brian didn't know, what no one in that restaurant knew, was that Alicia Grant spent her career evaluating restaurants just like this one. Not as a mystery diner, not as a critic, as a compliance and risk director for a hospitality investment group with legal authority and corporate reach. This restaurant wasn't just a place she randomly chose for dinner. It was on a short list. Alicia sent the video to 3 contacts with one short message. Confirmed discrimination. On site. Witnesses present. Then she made a call. "Yes," she said quietly. "I'm still here." Brian, meanwhile, was growing uncomfortable. He could feel eyes on him. Conversations didn't fully resume. The energy had shifted. Something was wrong. He just didn't know what. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. And then the front doors opened again. 2 sharply dressed individuals walked in, scanning the room with purpose. They weren't smiling. They weren't browsing the menu. They headed straight for the host stand. "Brian Collins?" one of them asked. Brian straightened. "That's me. We need to speak with you immediately." The room fell silent again. Alicia stood. "Yes," one of the executives said, turning toward her. "Ms. Grant, thank you for waiting." Brian's face drained of color. "What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly smaller. Without answering, the executive pulled out a tablet and pressed play. Brian's own voice filled the restaurant. "We don't serve your kind. You don't fit our standards. I decide who eats here." Every word. Clear. Undeniable. Guests stared. Staff looked down. The truth had nowhere to hide. Brian tried to speak. "I didn't mean it like that." "You meant it exactly as it sounded," the executive interrupted. Right there, in front of everyone, Brian was informed that his employment was terminated effective immediately. His actions violated company policy, federal law, and ethical standards. Security was called. Keys were collected. And Brian Collins was escorted out through the same doors he had stood behind minutes earlier. The restaurant was placed under immediate investigation. Alicia was offered apologies, compensation, private seating, anything she wanted. She declined. "I didn't come here for special treatment," she said calmly. "I came here expecting equal treatment." As she walked toward the door, the waitress who had frozen earlier whispered, "Thank you." Alicia paused, then nodded. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Statements were issued. Policies were updated. Mandatory training was announced. And Brian's career was over. Not because Alicia was loud, not because she demanded revenge, but because she stayed calm, told the truth, and let accountability do the rest. The lesson was simple and unforgettable. Never judge someone by appearance. Never mistake silence for weakness. And never assume the person you disrespect has no power. Because sometimes the quietest response carries the loudest consequences. Brian smirked as Alicia walked away. He thought he had won. To him, it was just another uncomfortable moment handled the way he always handled them, with authority and dismissal. He leaned against the counter, joking quietly with a server, completely confident that the situation was over. What he didn't know was that Alicia Grant wasn't just another customer. She was a senior compliance director for a national hospitality investment firm, a firm that owned partial stakes in over 200 restaurants, including this very one. And she wasn't recording for social media clout. She was documenting a clear violation of federal civil rights law, company policy, and brand standards. Within seconds, Alicia sent the video to 3 people: the restaurant's corporate headquarters, the regional operations director, the firm's legal compliance team. And she made one final call. "Hi," she said calmly. "Yes, I'd like to file a formal discrimination report. I'm currently on location." She gave the address. She confirmed the manager's name. She noted that there were multiple witnesses. Her voice had never shook. Brian, meanwhile, laughed with another employee, replaying the moment in his head with satisfaction. He felt untouchable. Managers like him always did. What he couldn't see was that his words were already being replayed, in real time, inside a corporate boardroom miles away. Executives sat silently as the video played. There was no debate, no confusion, no context to soften it. The decision was immediate. "Send the team," one of them said. Back at the restaurant, the atmosphere had shifted again. Conversations were forced. Laughter sounded hollow. Staff moved cautiously as if walking on glass. Alicia sat quietly near the entrance, her phone face down on the table. To anyone watching, she looked like someone waiting for a ride. But she was waiting for accountability. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Brian glanced at the clock, slightly irritated. "Let's get back to work," he said to his staff. "People are staring." Just then, the front doors opened. 2 sharply dressed individuals walked in, followed by a third carrying a tablet. They didn't stop to admire the decor. They didn't ask for a table. They headed straight for the host's stand. "Brian Collins?" one of them asked. Brian straightened, confused. "Yes. We need to speak with you." Something in their tone wiped the smirk from his face. "What's this about?" he asked. The woman with the tablet pressed play. Brian's voice echoed through the restaurant, louder than before. "We don't serve your kind. You don't meet our standards. I decide who eats here." Every word landed like a hammer. Guests turned in their chairs. Staff stared at the floor. The truth filled the room, undeniable and irreversible. Brian stammered. I was just trying to." "This conversation is over," the executive said calmly. Right there, in front of everyone, Brian Collins was informed that his employment was terminated effective immediately. His actions violated federal law, company ethics, and brand policy. His keys were collected. His access was revoked. Security was called. Brian was escorted out through the front door, the same door he had stood behind minutes earlier, so confident in his authority. The restaurant was placed under immediate investigation. Mandatory training was announced. Corporate oversight was enforced. One executive turned to Alicia. "We'd like to apologize. Please accept." Alicia raised her hand gently. "I don't need compensation," she said. "I needed accountability." As she stood to leave, a young server whispered, "Thank you for not staying quiet." Alicia smiled softly. "Silence protects the wrong people," she replied. By the next morning, the video had spread across social media. Headlines followed. Statements were released. Brian Collins' career in hospitality was over. Not because Alicia was powerful, but because he forgot one simple truth. You never know who's watching. You never know who someone is. And discrimination always collects its debt, sooner or later. That night, it arrived in minutes. Less than 15 minutes later, the front door opened again. This time, it wasn't customers. 2 corporate executives walked in, badges visible, expressions serious. Their presence alone shifted the energy in the room. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the clinking of glasses faded. Brian's smile vanished. They scanned the room briefly, then asked, "Is Alicia Grant still here?" Alicia stood up. "Yes," she said. "I am." The executives nodded and turned toward the host's stand. "Brian Collins, please step aside." Brian forced a laugh. "Is something wrong?" Guests watched in silence as one executive connected a tablet to the front desk system. The screen lit up. Then the sound filled the room. The video played out loud. Every word, every tone, every insult. "We don't serve your kind. You don't meet our standards. I decide who eats here." The room felt smaller with every second. Brian's face drained of color. His confident posture collapsed. He tried to interrupt, but the executive raised a hand. "Let it finish." When the video ended, the silence was unbearable. Brian swallowed hard. "I can explain," he said quickly. "It was a misunderstanding. I was under pressure. She took it out of context. The executive didn't blink. There is no context where this is acceptable. Brian tried again, this time with a nervous laugh. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. That was his final mistake. Actually, the executive said calmly, this is exactly as big as it needs to be. Right there, in front of staff and customers, Brian Collins was informed that his employment was terminated immediately. His actions violated company policy and federal civil rights law. His name would be added to an industry-wide do not hire list. Brian's shoulders slumped. Keys were collected. Access credentials were revoked. Security stepped forward quietly, professionally. No one spoke as Brian was escorted toward the exit. The same guests who had witnessed the discrimination now watched the consequences unfold. Some nodded. Others looked stunned. A few quietly applauded. The restaurant was placed under immediate investigation. Operations would continue, but under strict corporate oversight. Mandatory training would be enforced. Policies would be reviewed from top to bottom. Staff members stood frozen, unsure whether to feel relieved or shaken. One young server wiped away tears. Another stared at the floor, replaying the moment in her head. The executive turned to Alicia. We want to apologize, he said sincerely. What you experienced should never happen. Please allow us to offer a private apology, a complimentary meal, and compensation. Alicia listened, then gently shook her head. I appreciate the apology, she said, but I don't need gifts. The executive looked surprised. I needed acknowledgement, Alicia continued. And accountability. She glanced around the room, at the guests, the staff, the witnesses. Discrimination survives when it's convenient, she said calmly. Tonight it wasn't. As Alicia prepared to leave, a server approached her quietly. Thank you, she whispered. Most people would have walked out and said nothing. Alicia smiled softly. Silence protects the wrong people, she replied. She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, not in triumph, not in anger, but in certainty. By morning, the video had gone viral. Corporate statements flooded social media. News outlets picked up the story. The restaurant announced policy reforms and mandatory bias training. And Brian Collins' career in hospitality was officially over. Not because someone wanted revenge, but because consequences finally caught up. The lesson echoed far beyond that restaurant. Never mistake authority for immunity. Never assume no one important is watching. And never forget dignity demands accountability. That night, justice didn't shout. It spoke calmly and ended everything. Before leaving, Alicia turned back to the room. She spoke calmly, but her words carried weight, the kind that doesn't need volume to be felt. I didn't come here to ruin anyone, she said. I came here to eat. The room remained silent. No phones, no whispers. Every eye was on her. She looked directly at the staff, then briefly at the guests who had watched everything unfold. But discrimination survives, she continued, because people think no one important is watching. She paused. Today, she said softly, someone was. No applause followed. None was needed. The message had already landed. Alicia walked out of the restaurant with steady steps, her shoulders relaxed, her expression unchanged. She didn't look back again. She didn't wait for praise or approval. For her, the moment was already complete. Outside, the city moved on as usual. Cars passed. People laughed on sidewalks. Life didn't pause, but something had shifted. By the next morning, the video was everywhere. Social media feeds filled with outrage, support, and reflection. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines appeared across screens. Restaurant manager fired after discriminatory incident. Calm response leads to immediate consequences. The restaurant issued a public apology within hours. The statement was carefully worded, but the damage was already done. Mandatory bias training was announced for all staff. Corporate oversight was increased. Policies were rewritten, not because it looked good, but because it had to be done. And Brian Collins' professional reputation was permanently damaged. In an industry built on trust, hospitality, and image, there was no recovering from a moment caught so clearly, so publicly. Brian released a short statement later that week, claiming regret and misunderstanding. But it changed nothing. The industry had seen enough. Meanwhile, Alicia didn't give interviews. She didn't post follow-up videos. She didn't celebrate what had happened. When asked by a colleague why she stayed so calm, her answer was simple. Anger would have made it about me. Calm made it about the truth. Alicia never shouted, never insulted, never demanded revenge.